Ma'am, you need to stand up now. And frankly, you don't look like you belong in this cabin. The words cut through the quiet hum of Flight 847's first-class cabin like a blade through silk. They weren't whispered. They weren't apologetic. They were delivered with the cold certainty of a man who had never been questioned, never been challenged, never been wrong. Captain Marcus Vale stood in the narrow aisle, his gold-striped uniform catching the overhead lights, his jaw set in a line that brooked no argument. Behind him, two airport security guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands already moving toward their radios before they even knew what they were dealing with. Zara Williams didn't move. She sat in Seat 1A, the premium bulkhead position closest to the cockpit, her back straight against the cream leather that seemed to swallow her slight frame. The oversized charcoal hoodie draped loosely over her shoulders, the cuffs frayed from years of wear. Her worn gray sneakers rested flat on the pristine carpet toes, scuffed laces faded. She looked to everyone watching completely out of place. Her hands lay open on her thighs, palms visible, no clenched fists, no trembling. The kind of stillness that unsettles people who expect fear. Her dark eyes, calm and focused, lifted to meet Vale's gaze. The kind of eyes that don't beg, don't explain, don't justify. The kind that simply watch. "Captain," she said, her voice steady, almost quiet. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" Vale's laugh was sharp, dismissive, a sound that had silenced junior officers and intimidated passengers for 25 years. He leaned closer, his shadow falling across her lap, invading her space with practiced authority. "I have a priority, VIP boarding in 2 minutes," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. "Senator Richard Hayes, security protocols require this specific seat. You need to relocate to the rear of the cabin immediately." Around them, the atmosphere shifted like pressure dropping before a storm. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The soft electronic chimes and muted conversations that normally filled first class gave way to something heavier, more electric. Something that made people lean forward in their seats and reach for their phones. In row 2, Jake Morrison had already lifted his device, thumb hovering over the record button. Tech executive, 35 years old, he'd seen enough workplace harassment to recognize it instantly. But this felt different. This felt deliberate. This felt like something the world needed to see. Zara tilted her head slightly, as if considering something far beyond the captain standing over her. Her phone buzzed once against her palm, a soft vibration that seemed to anchor her in the moment. She glanced down, tapped the screen twice, and slid it back into her hoodie pocket. "Once I stand up," she said, her voice carrying a quiet weight that made nearby passengers strain to listen, "you're not going to like what happens next." Vale straightened his expression, hardening from confident to irritated. Behind him, the galley entrance framed flight attendant Isabella Rodriguez, 28, her hands twisting together at her waist as she watched the confrontation unfold. 5 years of service had taught her to read the signs. Escalation, humiliation, the kind of moments that ended careers and destroyed lives. "Enough," Vale said, turning slightly to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions for a legitimate security requirement." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Whispers rippled through the cabin, soft and sharp. Who does she think she is? Is she drunk? They should have caught this at boarding. In row 3, Amanda Foster, a travel blogger from Sydney, pulled out her phone with deliberate slowness. She'd documented discrimination in hotels across 3 continents, but never witnessed it live at 40,000 feet. Her finger found the camera app as Jake Morrison, 2 rows behind her, finally pressed record. "This is Jake Morrison coming to you live from Flight 847. He whispered into his phone, the screen already showing 47 viewers that climbed to 156 as he spoke. We're witnessing something that shouldn't happen in 2024, but here we are. A black passenger being told she doesn't belong in first class. Isabella stepped forward, her voice barely audible above the cabin's ambient noise. Captain, her manifest entry is valid. Seat 1A is properly assigned. Vale's head snapped toward her with laser focus. I didn't ask for commentary, Rodriguez. But Isabella had seen enough. The way passengers avoided eye contact with Zara, the way they whispered behind cupped hands, the way they participated in a humiliation that would follow this woman far beyond this flight. She pulled out her tablet, fingers moving with purpose. Her boarding pass matches our records exactly, she said louder this time. Premium reservation paid in full. No flags or restrictions. Zara watched the exchange with something approaching curiosity. Not fear, not anger, just the clinical observation of someone who had seen this performance before. She reached into her hoodie pocket again, this time pulling out a slim black card that caught the overhead light like obsidian. You haven't even checked my identification, she said, extending it toward Vale. He took it with 2 fingers, holding it at arm's length as if it might contaminate him. His eyes flicked across the surface, then narrowed. Zara Williams. He read aloud, his tone suggesting the name meant nothing to him, which in that moment it didn't. The card itself was unmarked except for a small logo in the corner, a stylized wing design that Isabella recognized but couldn't quite place. Vale turned it over, examining it like evidence in a crime he was certain had been committed. This looks suspicious, he announced to no one in particular. High-limit cards like this are often fraudulent, used by people trying to access services they can't afford. Jake's viewer count hit 1,200. Comments were flooding the stream faster than he could read them, a digital waterfall of outrage and disbelief. Call her out! This is disgusting. Get her name. Someone needs to stop this. Amanda had started her own stream, her Australian accent cutting through the cabin noise. I'm filming from Flight 847 New York to London, and what we're seeing here is absolutely unacceptable. A woman is being removed from her paid seat because of how she looks. The streams were picking up momentum now, shared and reshared across platforms. Plane shame was starting to trend in real time as viewers screenshot the most egregious moments and spread them across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Zara felt the familiar weight settling behind her ribs. Not fear. She'd moved beyond fear years ago. But recognition. The same tone, the same assumptions, the same casual cruelty that had followed her through airports, hotels, and boardrooms since she was old enough to travel alone. At 24, she'd walked into a boutique hotel in Atlanta after a red-eye flight, exhausted from investor meetings, confirmation number ready. The man at the front desk had looked her up and down, sweatshirt, sneakers, tired eyes, and told her their systems were down. Come back when the manager was available. She'd slept in her rental car that night, drafting a business plan on her phone that would eventually grow into an $18 billion empire built on a simple principle: dignity shouldn't depend on designer labels. Now standing in the aisle of a plane she owned, facing down the same kind of man who had tried to erase her before Zara watched the phones multiply around her. Jake's stream was approaching 5,000 viewers. Amanda's was climbing toward 2,000. 3 other passengers had joined the documentation, their screens glowing like digital witnesses in the dimmed cabin. We're live on multiple platforms right now, Jake announced, no longer trying to whisper. And what we're seeing is a textbook example of racial profiling. The passenger has done nothing wrong. She has a valid ticket. She's sitting quietly in her assigned seat, and she's being removed because a white captain thinks she doesn't belong here. The comments were a rapid-fire stream of support and outrage. Get his name, what airline is. This someone call the news. This is 24 WTF. Vale noticed the phones now, his expression shifting from confident to annoyed. I need everyone to stop recording immediately. This is a security matter. Actually, no. Amanda called out, her blogger instincts fully activated. Passengers have every right to document discriminatory behavior. This is going live to my 200,000 followers." Jake looked at his screen. His viewer count had exploded to 15,000 and climbing. The hashtags were spreading flight shame, seatgate Zara Williams. Someone had already identified her from previous news coverage, though Vale remained oblivious. Zara pulled out her phone again, typed a brief message, and sent it. Somewhere in Manhattan, in a corporate office 3 blocks from JFK, her assistant Maya Thompson received a text that contained just 4 words. Authorization code Alpha 7. Execute. Maya's fingers flew across her keyboard. Within seconds, priority alerts were cascading through aviation management networks, corporate notification procedures, and crisis response protocols that had been designed for exactly this scenario. The cabin door hissed open, and Senator Richard Hayes stepped into first class like he owned it. Early 60s, red-faced and broad, his expensive suit worn with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. 2 aides followed eyes, scanning the cabin, calculating the disruption to their boss's schedule. Hayes surveyed the scene. The phones, the tension, the black woman still sitting calmly in what he considered his seat. And his frown deepened. "Marcus, what's the delay?" he demanded. "My back is killing me, and I need to get airborne." Vale's demeanor shifted instantly. His shoulders relaxed. His smile appeared smooth and practiced. "Apologies, Senator. Just clearing out some debris." He gestured toward Zara without looking at her, the way someone might point out a stain on the carpet. Hayes's eyes traveled from her hoodie to her sneakers, lingering just long enough to form a judgment. He scoffed, shaking his head with performative disbelief. "This is first class now," he said to Vale loud enough for the cabin to hear. "Unbelievable." Zara met his gaze steadily. She saw the calculation there, the assumption, the quiet certainty that the world would move aside for him. She had seen that look in boardrooms, in lobbies, in the faces of men who believed their comfort mattered more than her dignity. "Senator Hayes," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard by the live streams. "You're absolutely right. This is first class, not charity." Hayes blinked momentarily, thrown by her composure. "Excuse me, Jake's stream hit 25,000 viewers." The comments were moving too fast to read a digital torrent of recognition and outrage as viewers began connecting dots that the men in the aisle couldn't see. "Oh my God, it's Zara Williams. She owns Apex Aviation. They don't know who she is. This is about to get epic." Vale stepped between them, reasserting his authority. "Ma'am, final warning. Move to your assigned seat in the rear of the aircraft or you'll be removed for non-compliance." The cockpit door hissed softly behind him as it sealed. 2 security officers appeared at the cabin entrance. Officer David Park, a careful man in his 40s who'd seen enough airport drama to recognize when something felt wrong, and Officer Maria Gonzalez, younger, more by-the-book hand already resting on her radio. "Problem?" Captain Park asked, his tone professional but cautious. "Disruptive passenger," Vale replied. "Refusing lawful crew instructions. False documentation suspected." Gonzalez stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Zara looked around the cabin one more time. At Jake, still streaming to 30,000 viewers. At Amanda, whose followers were sharing clips across multiple platforms. At Isabella, whose face had gone pale with the recognition that she was watching someone's life get destroyed over pride and prejudice. She stood slowly, the leather seat gradually returning to its original shape behind her. As she rose, something shifted in the cabin's atmosphere, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the pressure change before turbulence. "All right," she said quietly, reaching for her bag in the overhead compartment. "I'll step off your aircraft, Captain Vale." Vale exhaled, satisfied. Good choice. But as Zara pulled down her small travel bag, she paused, looking back at him with eyes that held no anger, no frustration, just a terrible, calm certainty. "You might want to check your flight tablet, Captain," she said. I believe you just received a priority message. Vale frowned. What message? Zara slung her bag over her shoulder and stepped into the aisle. She didn't answer his question. She didn't need to. The red alert beginning to pulse on the screen mounted beside his seat would do that for her. Officer Park reached for her arm, not roughly but with practiced efficiency. Around them, 37,000 people were watching live streams, sharing videos, and typing hashtags that would change everything in the next 60 seconds. Zara Williams, tech mogul and owner of Apex Aviation Group, walked toward the cabin door with quiet dignity, while the men who had humiliated her remained completely unaware that they had just made the worst mistake of their professional lives. The cabin door sealed behind her with a hollow thud that sounded to everyone listening like the end of something important. Inside the cabin, Senator Richard Hayes dropped into seat 1A with a grunt of satisfaction, stretching his legs and adjusting the premium headrest like he was settling into his personal throne. The leather whispered beneath him, molding to his form, as if recognizing authority. Finally, he muttered to his aide, Marcus Webb, who hovered nearby with a tablet and an expression of practiced deference. Some people really think the rules don't apply to them. A few passengers nodded, relieved that the disruption had been resolved. Champagne glasses clinked again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, carrying the shared understanding that order had been restored, that the proper hierarchy was back in place. None of them noticed the phone still recording. None of them realized that Jake Morrison's live stream had exploded to 85,000 concurrent viewers, or that Amanda Foster's travel blog audience was sharing clips across every platform imaginable. The hashtag Zara Williams was trending in 12 countries, spreading faster than any crisis management team could contain. Jake adjusted his angle to capture Hayes settling into the disputed seat. "So here we are, folks," he whispered into his phone, reading the flood of comments streaming past. "The senator has taken the seat. The woman has been escorted off. And according to my comments, we just watched something historic happen. Something these men have no idea about." The comments were relentless. "They kicked off a billionaire. She owns the airline. This is going to be legendary. Someone tell them who she is. Apex Aviation stock is about to crater." Webb leaned over Hayes' shoulder, scrolling through something on his tablet. His expression shifted from bored professionalism to confusion, then to something approaching panic. "Senator," he whispered urgently, "we might have a problem." Hayes waved him off, more interested in the flight attendant approaching with a champagne tray. "Whatever it is, it can wait until London." But Webb grabbed his arm. "Sir, you need to see this. The woman they just removed." Isabella Rodriguez moved through the cabin with practiced grace, but her hand shook slightly as she offered drinks. 5 years of customer service had taught her to read people, to diffuse tension, to make everyone feel welcome. What she'd just witnessed went against every principle she'd been trained on. More than that, it went against everything she believed about treating people with basic human dignity. At row 4, she paused beside Jake, whose phone screen was visible as he continued streaming. 92,000 viewers, he was saying softly. "This has gone completely viral. We're watching a discrimination incident that's being seen by nearly 100,000 people in real time." Isabella's breath caught. The number was staggering, but more than that, the name in Jake's comments section made her stomach drop. She'd seen it in corporate newsletters, on annual reports, in the employee handbook that outlined the values Apex Aviation was supposed to represent. Zara Williams, founder and CEO, net worth $18.2 billion according to Forbes, owner of the aircraft they were sitting in. "Oh no," Isabella whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Jake looked up. "You know something, don't you?" Isabella's eyes darted toward the cockpit where Captain Vale was running through his pre-flight checklist with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he'd handled a difficult situation perfectly. "I can't." She began, then stopped. The professional response warred with the human one. The right thing to do battled against the safe thing to do. Jake read her expression. She's someone important, isn't she? Before Isabella could answer, Captain Vale's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Vale. We apologize for the delay. We've resolved the security issue and will be departing shortly. Flight time to London remains 6 hours and 45 minutes. The announcement felt like a victory lap. Around the cabin, passengers settled in, convinced they were finally getting the premium service they'd paid for. In the cockpit, Vale was entering his flight plan when the priority message alert chimed. Expecting weather updates or air traffic delays. Instead, he found a message that made his blood run cold. Priority alert. Owner on board. Zara Williams, founder/CEO, Apex Aviation Group. Comply with all requests immediately. Contact operations. Vale stared at the words, reading them twice, 3 times, hoping they would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But the message remained accompanied by a corporate photo that showed the same woman who had just been escorted off his aircraft. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, but his hands were already shaking as he reached for the secure communication device. In the terminal, Zara Williams walked between Officers Park and Gonzalez with measured steps, her bag slung casually over her shoulder. The jet bridge felt longer than usual, each step echoing off the walls like a countdown. "Ma'am, Officer Park said quietly, I want you to know this doesn't feel right to me. What happened in there?" Zara glanced at him. Park was in his mid-40s. Careful eyes, the kind of expression that suggested he'd seen enough to recognize injustice when it stared him in the face. "What's your first name, officer?" she asked. "David," he replied, puzzled by the question. "David, you're going to want to remember this conversation," Zara said. "In about 3 minutes, you're going to receive a radio call that changes everything." Officer Gonzalez frowned. "Ma'am, what kind of call?" But Zara's phone was buzzing. She answered on the first ring. "Maya authorization confirmed," came the crisp voice of Maya Thompson, her executive assistant. "Legal is standing by. Media response team is activated. The board has been notified. Do you want me to implement the full protocol?" Zara paused at the terminal window, looking back at Flight 847 through the rain-streaked glass. The aircraft sat on the tarmac like a sleeping giant, unaware that its ownership was about to reassert itself in the most dramatic way possible. Full protocol, she confirmed. And Maya. "Make sure Captain Vale's 25-year service record is available for review. All of it." The line went quiet for a moment. "Understood. Anything else? Get Senator Hayes's financial records. I want his staff to see exactly how much he owes us before they land in London." Back on the aircraft, Webb had finally gotten Hayes to look at his tablet. The senator's face had gone through several shades of red before settling on a pale gray that suggested genuine panic. "This can't be right," Hayes whispered, staring at the Forbes profile photo. "The woman in the hoodie. She's worth $18 billion. Jake's live stream had hit 125,000 viewers. The comments were a waterfall of disbelief and anticipation. When are they going to realize Captain Vale is done? "I can't believe this is happening live." Greatest plot twist ever. She's walking back to the plane. Amanda Foster lowered her phone, her Australian accent cutting through the cabin chatter. "Folks, I need everyone to understand what's happening here. The woman who was just removed from this aircraft owns it. She owns the airline. She owns the bloody terminal we're sitting in." A ripple of confusion passed through first class. Passengers looked at each other, trying to process information that seemed impossible. "That's ridiculous," Hayes snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. If she owned the airline, why would she dress like that? "Like what?" Senator Amanda challenged, her camera still rolling. "Like a human being who values comfort over appearance. Like someone who doesn't need to prove her worth with designer labels." Vale's voice came over the intercom again, but this time it carried a subtle tremor. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief technical delay. Please remain seated while we resolve a communications issue. Jake read the comments flooding his stream. Guys, my viewers are telling me she's walking back to the aircraft. Zara Williams is coming back. Through the terminal windows, passengers could see movement on the jet bridge. 3 figures approaching the aircraft, 2 airport security officers, and a woman in a charcoal hoodie walking with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested she belonged wherever she chose to be. Isabella's radio crackled to life. All Apex Aviation personnel priority notification. Owner on property. Comply with all directives immediately. This is not a drill. She looked around the cabin at the passengers checking their phones at Senator Hayes, arguing with his aide at Captain Vale emerging from the cockpit with sweat beading on his forehead. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying more authority than it had ever held before. I need everyone to remain seated. We're about to have a very important visitor. Officer Park's radio exploded with static and urgency. Unit 12, hold position immediately. Do not detain the subject. Repeat. Do not detain. He stopped walking, his hand moving instinctively to the radio. Dispatch confirm instructions. You have the asset owner. The voice crackled back, edged with something between panic and disbelief. She owns the aircraft, the airline, the terminal, and probably the ground you're standing on. Release her immediately and stand by for instructions. Officer Gonzalez's eyes widened. She looked from the radio to Zara to the aircraft, trying to process information that seemed to violate the basic laws of how the world worked. Ma'am Park said slowly, I think we owe you an apology. Zara smiled for the first time since boarding. Not smugly, not triumphantly, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been patient enough to let the truth reveal itself. Officer Park, you're about to be part of something important, she said. In 30 seconds, I'm going to walk back onto that aircraft. When I do, I want you to watch how people's attitudes change. Not because I've changed, but because their understanding of who deserves respect has shifted. She turned toward the jet bridge door. That's the lesson here. Dignity shouldn't depend on what people think you're worth. Jake's viewer count hit 200,000. The comments were moving so fast they blurred together, but the sentiment was clear anticipation. Justice, the collective, held breath of a global audience waiting for a reckoning that felt both inevitable and impossible. On the aircraft, Captain Vale stood in the aisle, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed, urgent tones with corporate headquarters. His confident posture from 30 minutes earlier had collapsed into something approaching panic. Yes, I understand she's the owner, he whispered. But she looked like... her clothing suggested... How was I supposed to know? The response from the other end was apparently not comforting because Vale's face went through several shades of pale before settling on a color that suggested his career was flashing before his eyes. Hayes had stopped arguing with his aide and was frantically scrolling through his phone, pulling up news articles, corporate filings, anything that might help him understand how he just demanded a billionaire give up her seat to him. Isabella moved to the cabin entrance, her heart pounding. In her 5 years with Apex Aviation, she'd served celebrities, politicians, tech moguls, and foreign dignitaries. She'd been trained to recognize VYPs to provide exceptional service to high-value customers. She had never been trained for a situation where the CEO herself had been ejected from her own aircraft. The cabin door chimed softly. Electronic locks disengaged. The seal hissed as pressurization equalized. Zara Williams stepped back into first class. This time, everything was different. The cabin fell silent. Not the uncomfortable quiet that had followed Vale's initial confrontation, but something deeper. The kind of silence that happens when people suddenly realize they've been watching history unfold and didn't recognize it until the final act. Jake's stream hit 250,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen faster than humanly possible to read. Here she comes justice time. I've never seen anything like this. Greatest power move ever. They're all about to lose their jobs. Zara walked down the aisle with the same quiet dignity she'd shown when leaving, but something fundamental had shifted. She no longer hunched her shoulders or tried to minimize her presence. She moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Captain Vale stood frozen in the galley, his phone still pressed to his ear, his face the color of wet concrete. Senator Hayes had stopped looking at his tablet and was staring at Zara with an expression that suggested his world was collapsing in real time. Isabella stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ms. Williams, on behalf of all Apex aviation personnel, I want to apologize for what happened. It was completely unacceptable." Zara paused, studying Isabella's face. She saw genuine regret there, along with the kind of moral courage that had been missing from everyone else on the aircraft. "What's your name?" Zara asked. "Isabella Rodriguez, ma'am. I've been with the company for 5 years." "Well," Isabella Zara said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent cabin, "you're the only person who spoke up when it mattered. I won't forget that." She continued down the aisle, approaching seat 1A, where Senator Hayes sat like a man watching his political career evaporate in real time. The confrontation everyone had been waiting for was about to begin. Zara stopped beside seat 1A, looking down at Senator Richard Hayes with the kind of calm that precedes earthquakes. The cabin held its breath. Jake's live stream had exploded to 340,000 viewers, with comments moving so fast they created a digital blur of anticipation and outrage. "Senator Hayes," she said quietly, "you're sitting in my seat." Hayes looked up, his red face now drained of color, sweat beating at his temples despite the air conditioning. "Now listen here. I don't know who you think you are, but I think," Zara interrupted, her voice never rising above conversational level, "that I'm Zara Williams, founder and majority owner of Apex Aviation Group, which means I own this aircraft, this airline, and the maintenance contracts for your personal jet." The words hit the cabin like a shockwave. Gasps erupted from multiple rows. Someone's champagne glass slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering against the floor with a sound like breaking expectations. Jake's viewer count hit 400,000. The comments were a frenzy. "Oh my God," she said it. "Apex Aviation. Owner, $18 billion. They are so screwed. Greatest moment in internet history." Captain Vale dropped his phone. It clattered to the galley floor, the corporate voice on the other end still squawking instructions he could no longer hear over the roaring in his ears. 25 years of flying, 25 years of authority, 25 years of believing his uniform made him untouchable, and he'd just ejected his own boss from her own aircraft. Hayes scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over his own shoes in his haste to vacate the seat. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. If you had known I was wealthy, you would have treated me differently," Zara said, settling into seat 1A with fluid grace. "That's the problem, Senator. Respect shouldn't depend on net worth." She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her face with pale blue light. "Speaking of net worth, your Gulfstream is grounded at Teterboro. Maintenance fees overdue by 6 months. You owe my company $750,000. Hayes's aide Webb pulled out his tablet with shaking fingers. The numbers were all there, outstanding invoices, penalty fees, interest charges accumulating daily. Their private transportation was effectively hostage to the woman they'd just humiliated. "I can have that resolved immediately," Webb said desperately. Zara didn't look up from her screen. Too late for that conversation. Amanda Foster was live streaming to her 200,000 travel blog followers, her Australian accent cutting through the tension. "This is absolutely unprecedented. We're watching a billionaire CEO reclaim her aircraft from the people who tried to remove her for being black. This is going to change aviation forever. Isabella approached cautiously, her entire career flashing before her eyes. 5 years of perfect performance reviews, 5 years of building toward management, 5 years that might have just ended because she'd witnessed discrimination and hadn't done enough to stop it. "Ms. Williams," she began, her voice barely audible. Zara looked up from her laptop. "Isabella Wright, 5 years with the company, single mother, night school for your business degree. Apartment in Queens mortgage current." Isabella's eyes widened. "How did you—" "I know every employee in this company," Zara said, "especially the ones who show integrity under pressure. You tried to speak up when it mattered. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." She typed something on her laptop, then turned the screen toward Isabella. "Effective immediately, you're promoted to Manager of Customer Experience, reporting directly to the VP level. Starting salary $95,000. Full benefits, education assistance, and a company car." Isabella's knees nearly buckled. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me build an airline where what happened today never happens again." Through tears, Isabella nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely yes." Meanwhile, Captain Vale stood frozen in the galley, his phone buzzing incessantly with calls from corporate headquarters. His hands shook too badly to answer. The gold stripes on his sleeves, which had carried such weight for so many years, now felt like evidence of crimes he couldn't take back. Zara's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Captain Marcus Vale," she said without looking at him. 25 years of service, 14 customer complaints in the last 2 years, 7 incidents of what HR classified as aggressive passenger management, 3 discrimination allegations that were quietly settled. Vale's throat worked soundlessly. The corporate settlements weren't supposed to be public knowledge. "Your employment with Apex Aviation is terminated effective immediately," Zara continued. "Security will escort you from the aircraft. Your final paycheck will be direct deposited, minus deductions for tonight's delay, costs, customer compensation, and breach of conduct penalties." "Please," Vale managed to croak. "I have a family. A mortgage. 25 years of service has to count for something." Zara finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry or vindictive, just tired. "It does count, Captain. It counts as 25 years of opportunities to learn that a person's worth isn't determined by their appearance. You had 9,125 days to figure that out. Tonight was your final exam." Security officers appeared at the cabin entrance. Not airport security this time, but Apex Aviation's own personnel, their expressions professionally neutral as they approached Vale. "Gentlemen," Vale said desperately, recognizing the lead officer. "Tom, we've worked together for years. You know I'm not a racist. This was just a misunderstanding." Officer Tom Martinez cut him off with a raised hand. "Captain Vale, please surrender your company badge, identification, and access cards. You'll be escorted to the terminal and provided with transportation home." The cabin watched in stunned silence as Vale fumbled with his lanyard, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't work the clips. Martinez eventually helped him, carefully removing each piece of identification that had defined Vale's professional life. As they led him past Zara's seat, Vale stopped. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I truly am. If you had known, you would have treated me like a human being worthy of basic respect," Zara said, not unkindly. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem is that you thought it mattered." Vale's shoulders sagged as the full weight of his actions settled on him. 25 years of authority gone in 25 minutes. As security escorted him off the aircraft, passengers watched through their phones, documenting the end of a career built on the wrong foundations. Senator Hayes stood in the aisle, his expensive suit rumpled, his political instincts finally kicking in through the shock. "Ms. Williams, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. When I return to Washington, I'll be happy to discuss how we might work together on transportation policy." Senator Zara interrupted. "You're under the impression that you're returning to Washington as a senator." Hayes blinked. "What do you mean?" Zara's fingers danced across her keyboard again. "Your campaign finances are about to undergo scrutiny. Every donation, every expenditure, every favor traded for influence. My legal team is quite thorough." Webb pulled out his phone, scrolling frantically through news alerts. His face went pale. "Senator, the Ethics Committee just announced an emergency investigation. They're calling it Preliminary Findings of Financial Misconduct. The live streams were exploding. Jake's viewer count had hit 500,000. Amanda's travel blog followers were sharing clips across every social media platform imaginable. Senator Hayes was trending alongside Zara Williams and Flight Justice. "This is impossible," Hayes sputtered. "You can't destroy a Senate career over a seat assignment." "I'm not destroying anything," Zara replied calmly. "I'm simply ensuring that people see you clearly. 23 years in the Senate, and your first instinct when meeting someone different was to assume they didn't belong. That tells voters everything they need to know about your character." Hayes opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. The mathematics of political survival were unforgiving, and every phone in the cabin was broadcasting his humiliation to a global audience. "Your seat assignment," Zara continued, "is now 47B, middle seat, between a crying baby and someone who apparently brought fish sandwiches." The collective gasp from first class was audible even over the live streams, as Hayes gathered his belongings and shuffled toward the rear of the aircraft, his head down and his political career in ruins. Zara turned to address the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily to every seat, "I want to apologize for the disruption. This isn't how Apex Aviation operates, and it's not how human beings should treat each other." She stood commanding attention without effort. "What you witnessed tonight was discrimination, plain and simple. A passenger was judged not by her behavior, her ticket validity, or her right to be here, but by her appearance, by assumptions about who belongs in first class and who doesn't." Jake adjusted his phone to capture her perfectly, his 600,000 viewers hanging on every word. "This airline was built on a simple principle: everyone deserves to travel with dignity. Tonight we failed that standard catastrophically. But we're going to use this failure as a foundation for change." She touched her laptop screen, and the cabin's entertainment devices flickered to life, displaying the Apex Aviation logo. "Effective immediately, every Apex Aviation employee will undergo mandatory bias training. Not the standard corporate workshop, but real education about unconscious prejudice and its impact on real people. We're implementing AI monitoring for discriminatory behavior, passenger feedback procedures, and zero-tolerance policies for bias in any form." Isabella stood near the galley, tears streaming down her face. In 5 years with the company, she'd never heard leadership speak with such clarity about values that actually mattered. Furthermore, Zara continued, "Any passenger who experiences discrimination on our aircraft will receive full compensation, a written apology, and our commitment to investigate and correct the behavior that harmed them. This isn't about lawsuits or publicity. This is about being the airline we should have been all along." The cabin erupted in applause. Not the polite golf claps typical of first class, but genuine sustained approval that spoke to how hungry people were for accountability and change. Amanda lowered her phone, wiping at her eyes. "I've documented discrimination around the world," she said to her live stream audience, "but I've never seen someone turn their own humiliation into a commitment to transform an entire industry. This is leadership." Jake's comments section was moving too fast to read, but the sentiment was clear, overwhelming support for Zara's response, fury at the discrimination she'd endured, and hope that real change might actually be possible. Finally, someone with power doing something. This is how accountability works. Buying Apex stock, Immediately respect, respect, respect. Miguel Santos, the aviation technician who had been called to verify Zara's passenger status, approached hesitantly. Hispanic mid-30s, he'd spent the entire confrontation feeling sick about his role in the discrimination. "Ms. Williams," he said quietly, "I want to apologize. When they asked me to check your status, I knew something was wrong. I should have spoken up." Zara studied his face, seeing the genuine remorse there. "What's your name?" "Miguel Santos, ma'am." 7 years with maintenance. Miguel, you hesitated because you recognized injustice when you saw it. That moral instinct is exactly what we need more of. You're promoted to lead technician effective immediately with a mandate to train other staff on recognizing and preventing discriminatory requests. Miguel's eyes widened. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer, but I don't deserve a promotion for staying silent. You deserve it for feeling uncomfortable when asked to participate in something wrong," Zara replied, "and for having the courage to admit your mistake and commit to doing better." The transformations were happening in real time, broadcast live to nearly 1 million viewers across multiple platforms. What had started as a documentation of discrimination was becoming something unprecedented: immediate meaningful consequences for bad behavior and immediate meaningful rewards for moral courage. Officers Park and Gonzalez appeared at the cabin entrance, their expressions carefully neutral, but their relief visible. They'd been dreading the conversation with their supervisors about detaining a billionaire CEO. "Ms. Williams, Park said our chief wants to speak with you about tonight's incident." Zara shook her head. "Officer Park, you and Officer Gonzalez followed orders that you knew felt wrong. But you treated me with respect, even when you were required to escort me. That matters. Tell your chief that Apex Aviation will be implementing new protocols for passenger removals, including mandatory supervisor approval and body camera documentation." Park nodded gratefully. "Ma'am, if it helps, neither of us felt good about what was happening." "It does help," Zara said. "And it tells me that the procedure isn't broken everywhere. Sometimes good people just need permission to do the right thing." As the officers left, the cabin settled into a new rhythm. Conversations resumed, but they were different now. Passengers weren't just talking about flights and destinations. They were talking about bias, about assumptions, about how the simple act of treating people with dignity could transform not just individual lives, but entire industries. Jake finally ended his live stream, his phone battery nearly dead from broadcasting for over 2 hours. His final viewer count, 875,000 people who had witnessed something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The story was just beginning to spread. As Flight 847 finally pushed back from the gate under Captain Brooks's steady command, Ethan Brooks, the first officer who had been quietly horrified by Vale's behavior and was now acting captain, Zara opened her laptop to a file she rarely accessed. The folder was labeled simply Atlanta, and it contained documents that had shaped every decision she'd made in the 15 years since. She was 24, then fresh out of MIT with degrees in computer science and business, carrying 3 job offers and enough student loan debt to finance a small country. The investor meeting in Atlanta had been her first real shot at funding for the platform that would eventually become her empire, a logistics optimization method that could revolutionize how people and goods moved through complex networks. The boutique hotel had been her first choice, a place that marketed itself as a haven for young entrepreneurs and tech innovators. She'd made the reservation weeks in advance, confirmed it twice, even paid a deposit to guarantee late arrival after her red-eye flight. But when she'd walked through those glass doors at 2 a.m., exhausted and rumpled from travel, the man behind the desk had looked her up and down. Black hoodie backpack, tired eyes that didn't match his assumptions about who belonged in his lobby, and delivered the words that would echo in her mind for decades. "Our procedures are down. You'll have to come back when the manager's available." She'd stood there for a moment, confirmation email ready on her phone, credit card in hand, too tired to fully process what was happening. Around her, other late arrivals were being checked in without issue. A white businessman in an equally wrinkled suit. A young woman in yoga pants who looked like she'd stepped off a delayed flight. But for Zara, somehow the procedures were down. When will the manager be available, she'd asked. Hard to say. Maybe tomorrow afternoon. She'd slept in her rental car in the hotel parking lot, wrapped in a travel blanket she'd bought at the airport, using her laptop bag as a pillow. And as she lay there watching the hotel windows glow with warmth, she'd been denied, she'd opened her computer and started typing. The business plan she wrote that night, fueled by exhaustion and humiliation and the cold fire of determination, would grow into Apex Logistics, then Apex Transportation, and eventually Apex Aviation Group. Every algorithm she designed, every procedure she built, every company she acquired was guided by one principle. Dignity shouldn't depend on appearance, wealth, or anyone else's assumptions about who deserved respect. Her phone buzzed, pulling her back to the present. Maya Thompson, her executive assistant, was calling from Manhattan. Status report. Zara answered. The video clips are everywhere, Maya said. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Zara Williams is trending in 43 countries. Stock price is up 18% in after-hours trading. The Harvard Business Review wants an interview. So does 60 Minutes. Zara looked out the window as New York's lights fell away beneath them. And the backlash minimal so far. A few people questioning why you didn't identify yourself immediately, but the overwhelming response is supportive. The discrimination was too clear, too documented for anyone to defend. What about Vale and Hayes? Maya's voice carried satisfaction. Vale's home address was leaked by someone not us. Protesters are gathering. Peaceful so far, but his neighbors aren't happy about the attention. Hayes's office is in full crisis mode. 3 major donors pulled support in the last hour. Zara nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. Power created consequences intended and unintended. Her response to discrimination would reshape careers, influence legislation, and send ripples through industries far beyond aviation. The question wasn't whether she had the right to use that power, but whether she had the obligation to use it wisely. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, her head of data analytics and the architect of Apex's bias detection procedures. Jenny had been working on the project for 3 years, building algorithms that could identify discriminatory patterns in everything from seat assignments to upgrade distributions. The flight data is fascinating, Jenny's message read. We've been tracking Vale for 8 months. 17 instances of moving minority passengers for VIP accommodations. Tonight wasn't an anomaly. It was a pattern. Zara opened the attached file, revealing a dashboard that mapped Vale's decisions over the past 2 years. The visualization was damning a clear bias toward relocating Black and Hispanic passengers, while accommodating white passengers' requests for seat changes, even when those requests were less justified. How many other captains show similar patterns? She typed back. 12 across the entire fleet. We've been building cases quietly, waiting for the right moment to implement comprehensive reforms. Tonight accelerated our timeline considerably. This was the deeper game Zara had been playing for years. The public saw a successful entrepreneur building a transportation empire. What they didn't see was the methodical construction of accountability procedures designed to catch and correct bias before it could harm people. Every Apex Aviation aircraft was equipped with recording devices that captured not just safety data, but behavioral patterns. Every customer interaction was analyzed for signs of discriminatory treatment. Every employee decision was tracked and measured against fairness metrics that most companies didn't even attempt to measure. Jenny, prepare the full report, Zara typed. Tomorrow morning, I want every discriminatory pattern in our procedure exposed and addressed. No exceptions. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus Rivera, her general counsel, calling from Los Angeles. "Zara, I've been fielding calls for 2 hours," Marcus said without preamble. "The legal exposure is significant. Vale could claim wrongful termination. Hayes might argue defamation. And there are broader implications for how we handle discrimination claims," Marcus Zara said patiently. Vale discriminated against a passenger based on race. He did it publicly in front of witnesses while being live-streamed to hundreds of thousands of people. Our exposure is minimal. But the precedent. The precedent is that discrimination has consequences. Real consequences. Immediate consequences. I'd rather fight 100 wrongful termination lawsuits than let one more passenger be humiliated the way I was tonight. Marcus was quiet for a moment. He'd worked with Zara for 8 years, long enough to recognize when her mind was made up. Understood. I'll prepare for the legal challenges. And Marcus start drafting model policies for zero-tolerance bias enforcement. I want every airline in the industry to have a template for doing better. This was how change really happened, Zara reflected as the call ended. Not through viral videos or public shaming, though those had their place, but through the methodical construction of procedures that made discrimination harder to hide and more expensive to ignore. Isabella Rodriguez moved through the cabin with a different energy, now her promotion still feeling surreal. She'd been a flight attendant for 5 years, working nights and weekends to support her 8-year-old daughter Sophia while completing her business degree online. The $95,000 salary Zara had offered was more than she'd dreamed of making before turning 40. But more than the money, what moved her was the recognition. For 5 years, she'd watched discrimination happen in small ways. Upgrade denials that followed patterns, service delays that somehow affected minority passengers. More often, the subtle hierarchy that determined who got attention and who got ignored. She'd reported incidents before filing careful documentation with HR departments that seemed designed to lose complaints rather than address them. But tonight, for the first time in her career, she'd seen immediate accountability. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, who was watching. "Sophia, mija, you're on the news. They're saying you stood up to discrimination. I'm proud of you." Isabella wiped tears from her eyes as she offered refreshments to passengers who were still processing what they'd witnessed. At row 7, an elderly black gentleman named William Turner touched her hand as she passed. "Young lady," he said softly, "I've been flying for 60 years, since before integration. What that woman did tonight, what you did by speaking up, it matters more than you know." Turner's wife Dorothy nodded agreement. We saw it happen to others so many times. People looking at us like we didn't belong, questioning our tickets, making assumptions. But tonight someone with real power said enough. That's hope. Isabella knelt beside their seats. "Mr. Turner, can I ask you something? How do we make sure tonight isn't just a moment? How do we make it permanent change?" Turner smiled, his eyes bright with decades of hard-won wisdom. "You keep doing what you did tonight, child. You keep speaking up when you see wrong, even when it's uncomfortable. And you remember that dignity isn't something people earn. It's something they're born with." Meanwhile, in the rear of the cabin, former Senator Hayes sat in middle seat 47B, squeezed between a fussy toddler and a construction worker, eating a particularly aromatic sandwich. His aide Webb had been relegated to 52C, separated by 15 rows, and a bathroom that smelled like industrial disinfectant. Hayes stared at his phone, watching his political career disintegrate in real time. The ethics investigation was just the beginning. Opposition researchers were already digging through 23 years of vote statements and recorded comments, looking for patterns that matched tonight's behavior. His wife had called twice, her voice tight with the strain of watching their life unravel on national television. Their daughter, a junior at Georgetown Law, had sent a single text, "Dad, how could you?" But it was the call from his longtime chief of staff, Patricia Kim, that had really driven home the scope of his catastrophe. "Senator, the polling data is preliminary, but it's devastating," she'd said. 73% disapproval among registered voters, 89% among voters under 35. Your primary challenger just got 3 major endorsements in the last hour. Hayes had built his career on understanding power dynamics, on knowing when to push and when to retreat. What he'd failed to understand was that those dynamics were changing, that the casual prejudices that had been acceptable in private clubs and donor dinners were becoming political suicide in an interconnected world. His phone buzzed with another news alert. Apex Aviation stock soars as CEO's discrimination response wins praise. The woman he'd dismissed as debris had gained $3.2 billion in net worth while he'd lost a Senate seat. The mathematics of respect had never been clearer. In seat 1, Zara closed her laptop and looked around the cabin. The passengers were settling into sleep or quiet conversation, but the energy remained different. People were making eye contact across racial lines, starting conversations they might never have initiated before tonight. She thought about the 24-year-old who had slept in a parking lot in Atlanta writing business plans by dashboard light. That young woman had been angry, humiliated, determined to prove she belonged anywhere she chose to be. The woman she'd become understood that belonging wasn't something you proved to others. It was something you claimed for yourself and then worked to guarantee for everyone else. Her phone displayed one final message from Sofia Rodriguez, Isabella's 8-year-old daughter, Ms. Williams. "My mom says you're helping make airplanes fair. Thank you for helping my mom be brave." Zara smiled, closing her eyes as the aircraft climbed through the night sky. Tomorrow would bring interviews, congressional hearings, corporate responses, and the endless complexities of turning a moment of accountability into lasting institutional change. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, she felt like the circle was finally closing. By the time Flight 847 reached cruising altitude, the story had escaped the boundaries of aviation news and became something larger, a cultural moment that touched every conversation about respect, discrimination, and power in America. Jake Morrison's live stream had been downloaded and shared across every major platform. The original video, which captured the moment Zara revealed her identity, had been viewed 23 million times on TikTok alone. On Twitter, Zara Williams was trending alongside Flight Justice and Respect Matters, generating 400,000 posts per hour. Maya Thompson worked from Apex Aviation's Crisis Communications Center in Manhattan, coordinating with social media managers, legal teams, and public relations specialists across 3 time zones. The response was unlike anything she'd handled in 15 years of corporate communications. "The numbers are unprecedented," she reported to Zara via encrypted call. YouTube views 45 million and climbing. Instagram stories featuring the video 2.8 million. LinkedIn posts from business leaders over 50,000. This isn't just viral content anymore. This is a business case study being written in real time. The hashtags had taken on lives of their own. Zara Williams generated stories from travelers sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Captain Vale became a cautionary tale about the consequences of bias. Senator Hayes evolved into a political liability that opponents would use for decades. But it was Respect Matters that captured the deeper impact. Under that tag, people shared not just travel horror stories, but workplace discrimination, housing, bias, educational inequality. A catalog of moments when dignity had been denied, based on appearance, accent, or assumption. Celebrity responses amplified the reach exponentially. Oprah Winfrey posted a photo of herself in casual clothes with the caption, "Respect isn't earned by designer labels. It's given because we're human. Respect matters." The post generated 2.1 million likes in 6 hours. Actor Michael B. Jordan shared the video with his own story. "I've been asked to leave first-class seats I paid for. Money doesn't make you immune to racism, but power can help you fight back." Zara Williams. Flight Justice. The international response was equally powerful. In the UK, where Flight 847 was headed, Member of Parliament Diane Abbott tweeted, "Discrimination knows no borders. Watching an American CEO transform humiliation into accountability gives me hope for change everywhere." American Airlines was the first competitor to respond, announcing an immediate review of passenger accommodation policies within 3 hours of the video's initial posting. Delta followed with a commitment to enhanced bias training for all customer-facing staff. United Southwest and JetBlue issued similar statements by morning. But corporate America's response went beyond airlines. Marriott Hotels announced plans to implement Apex's bias detection technology across their properties. Hilton committed to diversity audits of customer service interactions. Car rental companies, cruise lines, and train operators scrambled to review their own policies before becoming the next discrimination story to go viral. The Federal Aviation Administration issued an unusual late-night statement. The FAA takes seriously any reports of discriminatory treatment of passengers. We will be reviewing the circumstances of tonight's incident and working with industry partners to ensure all travelers are treated with dignity and respect. On Capitol Hill, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez announced plans for hearings on transportation discrimination. Senator Elizabeth Warren called for federal legislation requiring bias training for all aviation personnel. Even Republican lawmakers wary of being associated with Hayes's behavior issued statements supporting fairness in customer service. The stock market response was immediate and dramatic. Apex Aviation Group's shares jumped 34% in after-hours trading as investors recognized the brand value of moral leadership. Competing airlines saw mixed results. Stocks fell for carriers with recent discrimination controversies, while companies with strong diversity records gained ground. But the real industry impact went deeper than stock prices. Human resources departments across corporate America were receiving urgent requests to review customer interaction policies. Companies that had treated bias training as a check-the-box exercise were suddenly investing in comprehensive programs designed to prevent viral disasters. The video had created a safe space for people to share experiences they'd previously kept private. Under respect matters, a pattern emerged that was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Dr. Aisha Patel, a cardiologist from Chicago, posted, "I've been randomly selected for additional screening on 47 of my last 50 flights. Tonight's video gave me the courage to file formal complaints. No more silence." Marcus Williams, a software engineer from Seattle, shared, "They moved me from first class because a gold member needed my seat. The gold member was white. I had platinum status. Watching Zara Williams tonight reminded me that documentation matters." The stories weren't limited to aviation. Hotel concierge questioning black guests' room reservations. Restaurant hostesses claiming tables weren't available while seating white customers without reservations. Rental car agents requiring additional documentation from Hispanic customers. But mixed with the pain were stories of change. Flight attendant Maria Santos from Phoenix posted, "After watching tonight's video, I reported my supervisor for instructing us to scrutinize suspicious passengers more carefully. HR opened an investigation this morning." Customer service representative David Kim from Los Angeles wrote, "My manager told us to trust our instincts about who belonged in premium service areas. I realize now that our instincts were just bias. I'm requesting transfer to a team that values real customer service." By London morning, the story had circulated through European media with the intensity usually reserved for political scandals. The BBC led their morning broadcast with the story framing it as American corporate accountability in the social media age. The Guardian published an editorial titled, "When Power Meets Prejudice Lessons from 40,000 Feet," which examined how social media had transformed the consequences of discrimination from private embarrassment to public accountability. In Germany, Lufthansa announced an immediate review of passenger treatment protocols. Air France committed to enhanced sensitivity training. British Airways, perhaps feeling the pressure of hosting Zara's arrival, issued a statement welcoming her to London and praising her leadership in promoting aviation equality. Asian markets responded with particular interest. In Japan, where subtle discrimination against foreign travelers was often overlooked, news outlets examined the story as a case study in how global connectivity was making local bias a worldwide concern. Chinese social media, despite restrictions, buzzed with discussion about discrimination faced by Chinese travelers abroad. WeChat groups shared translations of the video with commentary about respect and dignity that transcended cultural boundaries. The European Union announced plans to examine discrimination in transportation across member nations, using the Apex aviation incident as a catalyst for broader policy discussions. Congressman John Lewis III, representing Georgia's 5th District, introduced emergency legislation within 12 hours of the video's release. The Passenger Dignity Act would require federal bias training for all commercial aviation personnel and establish passenger protection protocols for discrimination incidents. What we witnessed on Flight 847 was unconscionable, Lewis said in a statement. But the swift, decisive action taken by Ms. Williams shows us what accountability looks like when leaders choose justice over comfort. Senator Cory Booker announced plans for broader transportation equity legislation, while Senator Amy Klobuchar called for FAA investigations into training and hiring practices across the industry. The responses weren't limited to progressive politicians. Senator Susan Collins, a Republican moderate, issued a statement calling for bipartisan cooperation to ensure all Americans are treated with respect when they travel. Even President Biden weighed in, tweeting, "Every American deserves dignity and respect when they travel." Thank you to leaders like Zara Williams, who turn moments of discrimination into opportunities for lasting change. The regulatory impact extended beyond legislation. The Department of Transportation announced a comprehensive review of discrimination complaint procedures. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission opened an investigation into industry hiring and promotion practices. State governments began examining their own transportation authorities. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey committed to bias training for all airport personnel. California announced plans to tie state travel contracts to airlines' discrimination prevention records. But perhaps the most significant regulatory response came from the International Civil Aviation Organization, which announced plans to examine discrimination in air travel as a global human rights issue. The transformation wasn't limited to government action. Professional associations moved quickly to address the crisis in their industries. The Airline Pilots Association announced new ethical guidelines for pilot conduct. The Association of Flight Attendants strengthened their anti-discrimination policies and committed to protecting members who reported bias incidents. The International Air Transport Association issued guidelines for member airlines on preventing discrimination and responding to bias incidents, using Zara's approach as a model for swift, decisive action. Corporate boards across industries scheduled emergency sessions to review their own customer treatment policies. The video had become a case study in how quickly reputation damage could occur and how expensive discrimination could become when exposed to global scrutiny. By the time Flight 847 approached London airspace, the story had fundamentally changed conversations about bias, power, and accountability across multiple continents. What had started as one woman's decision to document her own humiliation had become a global movement toward more respectful treatment of all travelers. The real test, everyone understood, would be whether the attention and commitment would translate into lasting change or fade, like so many viral moments before it. As Zara prepared for landing, she received a message from Dr. King Williams, a civil rights historian at Howard University. "Ms. Williams, your grandmother would be proud. This is how progress happens. Not through perfect moments, but through people who refuse to accept that discrimination is normal." Looking out at London's lights growing larger beneath the aircraft, Zara thought about the 8-year-old girl who would grow up in a world where tonight's video existed, where accountability was documented and shared, where respect was increasingly non-negotiable. That thought made everything worth it. The Apex Aviation Training Facility in Atlanta hummed with activity as Isabella Rodriguez walked through the main corridor, her heels clicking against polished floors that reflected the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her new title, Vice President of Customer Experience, still felt surreal after 6 months, but the work had become her passion. The facility housed what had become the industry standard for bias prevention, a comprehensive program that combined virtual reality simulations, psychological testing, and real-world scenario training that other airlines were licensing for their own staff development. "Good morning, Isabella," called Dr. Jennifer Walsh, hurrying to catch up with a tablet full of data. The quarterly numbers are remarkable. Discrimination complaints across the industry are down 67%. Customer satisfaction scores for minority travelers have improved across all major carriers. Isabella smiled, though the numbers still carried the weight of individual stories. Behind each percentage point were real people who had been treated with dignity instead of suspicion, respect instead of discrimination. "What about our own metrics?" Isabella asked as they walked toward the main conference room. "Even better. 0 confirmed discrimination incidents in 6 months. Customer advocacy scores at all-time highs. And we're getting applications from flight attendants at every major airline. People want to work for a company that takes these issues seriously." The conference room was already full when they arrived. Maya Thompson was connecting via video from New York, while representatives from United, Delta, American, and Southwest joined remotely to review the latest bias detection algorithms that Apex had made open source. The AI monitoring procedure is identifying potential bias before it becomes discrimination, reported Carlos Mendoza, Apex's new director of algorithmic fairness. "We're catching patterns in upgrade distributions, seat reassignments, and service delays that might have gone unnoticed for years." Maya's voice came through clearly from the screen. "Zara wanted me to share the latest industry adoption numbers. 47 airlines worldwide are now using our bias detection technology. The UN Human Rights Council has requested a presentation on transportation equality, and Harvard Business School is developing a case study on turning crisis into transformation." Isabella thought about the young woman she'd been 6 months ago, afraid to speak up when she witnessed injustice, worried about protecting her job, over protecting her principles. The transformation wasn't just organizational, it was personal. Her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, had noticed the change. "Mommy, you stand up straighter now," she'd said the week before. "And you talk different when you tell me about work. Like you're proud." At a small flight training school in Phoenix, Marcus Vale stood before a classroom of aspiring pilots, his voice steady as he recounted the worst night of his career. The gold stripes were gone from his sleeves, replaced by the simple uniform of an instructor. But the lessons he was teaching were more valuable than anything he'd learned in 25 years of flying. "I destroyed my career in 25 minutes, he told the young pilots, many of them women and minorities who had fought for opportunities Vale had always taken for granted. "Not because of a mechanical failure or a weather emergency, but because I treated a passenger like she was less than human." The classroom was silent. Vale's story had become legend in aviation training programs. A cautionary tale about the cost of bias and the importance of treating every passenger with respect, regardless of appearance. "The worst part," Vale continued, "wasn't losing my job. It was realizing how many other passengers I'd treated poorly over the years. How many people I'd hurt with my assumptions and prejudices. How many careers I might have damaged with my behavior." A young black woman in the 3rd row, Jessica Martinez, raised her hand. "Captain Vale, why are you telling us this? Why put yourself through the humiliation?" Vale was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because if my shame can prevent even one of you from making the same mistakes, then maybe some good came from the worst night of my life." After the class, Vale drove to his small apartment, a far cry from the suburban house he'd lost in the divorce that followed his public disgrace. But the letters he received from former passengers who had experienced his bias, some forgiving, some not, reminded him that redemption was measured in changed behavior, not restored comfort. Meanwhile, in a modest office in Alexandria, Virginia, former Senator Richard Hayes worked late into the evening, preparing materials for the nonprofit organization he'd founded after losing his re-election bid by 37 percentage points. The Second Chances Initiative helped formerly incarcerated individuals navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives, finding housing, employment, and dignity in a procedure designed to keep them marginalized. It was ironic work for a man who had built his political career on law and order rhetoric. But Hayes had learned something about marginalization during his own fall from grace. Mr. Hayes said Denise Washington, a program coordinator, who had been skeptical when the disgraced politician had offered to work for free. "The Johnson family wants to thank you personally. You helped them find housing when no one else would even return their calls." Hayes nodded, filing away papers that documented small victories in the fight for human dignity. His political career was over, his financial security destroyed by legal fees and the loss of lobbying opportunities. But for the first time in decades, he was doing work that mattered more than his own advancement. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter, "Dad, I saw the article about your work with formerly incarcerated families. I'm proud of you. Finally." That message meant more than any Senate vote he'd ever won. The changes extended far beyond individual redemption stories. Across the aviation industry, the Apex protocols had become standard practice for handling discrimination incidents and preventing bias in customer service. At Chicago, O'Hare flight attendant Michael Torres was using his phone to document an interaction between a gate agent and an elderly Sikh passenger whose turban had triggered additional security screening. But instead of the harassment that might have occurred 6 months earlier, Torres watched as the agent explained the process respectfully, apologized for the inconvenience, and ensured the passenger reached his gate with time to spare. 6 months ago, that interaction would have been hostile, Torres reflected as he prepared for his own flight. Now, our training has taught us to see dignity in every passenger, not threats to be managed. In Seattle, Airport Security Supervisor Patricia Kim implemented new protocols that had reduced discriminatory stops by 80% while maintaining the same level of safety screening. The key was training officers to separate legitimate security concerns from unconscious bias. We learned that acting suspicious often meant looking different, Kim explained to a congressional oversight committee via video conference. Once we started measuring our decisions against objective criteria rather than subjective feelings, the disparities in treatment became obvious and correctable. The ripple effects reached beyond aviation. Hotels reported significant improvements in guest satisfaction among minority travelers. Car rental companies documented more equitable treatment in vehicle assignments and contract negotiations. Even restaurants began implementing service monitoring to ensure consistent treatment regardless of customer appearance. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred in corporate boardrooms, where the Flight 847 principle became shorthand for the business case for diversity and inclusion. The principle was simple. Treating all customers with respect wasn't just morally right. It was economically smart in an interconnected world where discrimination incidents could become global news within hours. In her office overlooking the Hudson River, Zara Williams reviewed quarterly reports that showed the extent of the transformation she'd triggered. Apex Aviation's stock price had stabilized 30% higher than its pre-incident value. Customer satisfaction scores had reached industry-leading levels. Employee retention was at an all-time high as workers felt pride in being part of meaningful change. But the numbers that mattered most were different. Discrimination complaints across the transportation industry had fallen by more than half. Bias training programs had been implemented by companies far beyond travel and hospitality. University business schools were teaching the Apex response model as an example of crisis leadership. Her phone displayed a message from Tyler Martinez, the 12-year-old boy who would appear in the anniversary story, 6 months hence. Ms. Williams, my mom says you made it so kids like me don't have to worry about being treated bad on airplanes. Thank you. Maya Thompson entered the office with her usual efficiency, carrying tablets and reports that detailed Zara's expanding influence on corporate accountability practices. The European Union has adopted transportation equality standards based on our model, Maya reported. The UN Human Rights Council wants you to lead a global initiative on dignity in travel, and Stanford Business School is offering you a full professorship to develop curriculum on bias prevention in corporate leadership. Zara looked out at the city below, where millions of people moved through transportation networks that were incrementally but measurably more respectful than they had been 6 months earlier. Any response from the White House about the Transportation Equity Summit, she asked. The president wants to announce it personally. Full federal support for implementing bias detection technology across all government transportation networks. They're calling it the most significant civil rights advancement in transportation since integration. Zara nodded, already thinking about the speech she would give, the policies that needed implementation, the resistance that would emerge from people who preferred the old procedures where discrimination was quietly tolerated. Her laptop chimed with a message from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, new data from the monitoring procedures. We're identifying bias patterns in healthcare, education, and financial services. The algorithms we developed for aviation are exposing discrimination everywhere. Are you ready to take this beyond transportation? Looking at the message, Zara felt the familiar weight of responsibility. The success of the aviation transformation had proven that bias detection and rapid response could create meaningful change. The question was whether she was ready to expand the fight to every procedure where dignity was negotiable and respect was rationed based on appearance. She typed a simple response. Send me the data. Let's see how big we can make this. Outside her window, a plane climbed through the afternoon sky carrying passengers who would never know that their respectful treatment was connected to a night 6 months earlier when one woman had refused to accept that discrimination was normal. The transformation was accelerating, and Zara Williams was just getting started. 1 year later, Zara Williams walked through JFK Terminal 4 with the same quiet confidence she'd carried that December night. But everything else had changed. The terminal buzzed with a different energy. Now staff moved with more intentionality. Passenger interactions carried more warmth, and the subtle hierarchies that had once segregated travelers had been replaced by a more equitable approach to service. She wore the same charcoal hoodie, the same worn sneakers carrying the same simple bag. It was partly nostalgia, partly experiment, and partly reminder that dignity should never depend on designer labels. At Gate 47, the same gate where Flight 847 had departed a year earlier, passengers waited for the London flight that would retrace her journey. But this time, news crews lined the terminal documenting the anniversary of what had become known simply as the flight in aviation circles. Jake Morrison approached with his familiar live stream setup, but his confidence was different now. The tech executive who had accidentally documented history had parlayed his viral moment into a platform for social justice advocacy that reached millions of followers. Zara Williams, 1 year later, he said into his phone camera. Ready to see how much has changed, Zara smiled. Ready to see how much more we need to do. They walked toward the gate together past a digital display showing the latest industry statistics. Discrimination complaints down 73% industry-wide, customer satisfaction up across all demographic groups, and bias training now mandatory for 200,000 aviation employees worldwide. But the real changes were subtler, more human. At the gate, Zara watched a young Hispanic family being welcomed aboard for priority seating, their children's eyes wide with excitement about their first international flight. A year ago, that family might have faced additional scrutiny, questioning about their ticket validity or assumptions about their ability to afford premium seats. Isabella Rodriguez appeared at the boarding gate, but her uniform was different now. As Vice President of Customer Experience, she wore a distinctive silver pin that identified her as part of Apex's executive team. Her 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, stood beside her visiting the workplace that had transformed her mother's life. Ms. Williams. Sophia said with the serious tone children use when they know something important is happening, "My mom says you helped make airplanes fair. I want to be like you when I grow up." Zara knelt to Sophia's eye level. "What does being like me mean to you?" "Standing up when things are wrong," Sophia replied immediately. "Even when it's scary." As boarding began, Zara noticed something that would have been impossible. A year earlier, the crew was genuinely diverse, not as a corporate checkbox exercise, but as a reflection of intentional hiring practices that prioritized character over appearance, competence over connections. The captain was Elena Morrison, a Latina pilot who had been promoted through Apex's Accelerated Advancement Program for underrepresented aviators. Her first officer was David Park Jr.'s son of the airport security officer who had initially escorted Zara from the aircraft, but had since become an advocate for respectful law enforcement procedures. Ms. Williams, Captain Morrison, announced over the intercom as Zara took her seat 1A again by deliberate choice on behalf of everyone at Apex Aviation. "Welcome aboard Flight 847. This flight represents not just a journey to London, but a commitment to ensuring every passenger travels with dignity and respect." The cabin erupted in applause, not the polite golf claps typical of first-class cabins, but sustained appreciation from passengers who understood they were part of something larger than transportation. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Zara opened her laptop to review messages that had accumulated throughout the day. Universities requesting speeches about corporate accountability, government officials asking for guidance on bias detection in public services, international organizations seeking advice on human dignity in customer service. But the message that caught her attention was from Tyler Martinez, now 13 years old, writing from his family's home in Phoenix. "Ms. Williams, I flew alone for the first time last week to visit my grandmother in San Diego. The flight attendants were so nice, and nobody questioned whether I belonged in first class. My mom used miles for the upgrade. I kept thinking about what you said about dignity being something you're born with, not something you earn. Thank you for making flights safe for kids like me." As Flight 847 climbed through the night sky toward London, Zara stood and addressed the cabin one final time. Unlike the defensive moment a year earlier, this speech carried the weight of proven transformation and sustainable change. "1 year ago, I sat in this same seat and experienced discrimination that should never happen to anyone." She began, her voice carrying easily to every row. But what happened after that night proved something important. When people of conscience document injustice and demand accountability, entire procedures can change. She paused, looking around the cabin at faces that reflected every demographic group, every economic background, every story of struggle and achievement that made up the American travel experience. The statistics tell part of the story. Discrimination complaints down 73% across the industry. Customer satisfaction up for every demographic group. Bias training now standard practice for 200,000 aviation workers. But numbers don't capture what really changed. She gestured toward Captain Morrison in the cockpit, toward Isabella Rodriguez in the galley, toward the diverse crew that represented intentional progress rather than accidental tokenism. What changed is the assumption that respect is something you earn, rather than something you deserve. What changed is the idea that dignity depends on appearance, accent, or anyone else's opinion about where you belong. What changed is the acceptance that discrimination is just part of business as usual. Jake Morrison live-streamed the speech to 2.3 million viewers, while passengers recorded on their phones, sharing moments that would ripple across social media for days to come. But the most important change, Zara continued, is the recognition that transformation doesn't happen through viral videos or corporate apologies. It happens when individuals choose courage over comfort, when employees speak up rather than stay silent, when leaders implement accountability procedures instead of just promising to do better. She looked directly at Sofia Rodriguez, who was watching with wide eyes from the galley where her mother worked. The world Sofia grows up in will be different from the one her mother navigated as a young flight attendant. Not because discrimination has been eliminated that work continues, but because we've proven that bias exposed to daylight doesn't survive, and procedures designed for accountability can evolve. The cabin was silent passengers hanging on every word, not because they were required to listen, but because they recognized they were hearing history being interpreted by the person who had made it. Every time you speak up against injustice, you're not just standing for yourself, Zara concluded. You're redesigning the world for everyone who comes after you. Your voice matters. Your dignity matters. Your presence in any space you choose to occupy matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. As applause filled the cabin, stretching on for nearly 2 full minutes, Zara returned to her seat with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had turned personal humiliation into institutional transformation. Outside the aircraft windows, stars wheeled overhead in patterns that had guided travelers for millennia. But inside the cabin, something newer was taking shape. A commitment to ensuring that the journey toward respect and dignity would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded. The plane flew on through the night, carrying passengers who understood they had witnessed not just a speech, but a promise about the kind of world they were all responsible for creating. When Flight 847 landed at Heathrow 12 hours later, Zara Williams walked off the aircraft with the same quiet dignity she had carried onto it a year earlier. But this time she walked into a world that was measurably more respectful, demonstrably more fair, and infinitely more accountable to the principle that every human being deserves to travel through life with dignity intact. The transformation was complete, but the work would never end. And Zara Williams, who had learned that power was most effective when used to lift others rather than elevate yourself, was ready for whatever came next. If this story moved, you remember that respect isn't earned by appearance. It's owed to every human being who walks through this world with courage and dignity. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to travel with respect. Subscribe for more stories where quiet strength changes the world. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, their dignity matters, and their presence in any space they choose to occupy matters. Because when we speak up against injustice, we don't just stand for ourselves, we redesign the world for everyone who comes after us. Your story matters. Tell it.